It's the holiday season, lots of drinking, but what if hangovers could be avoided? We'll discuss on the program today. Epilepsy and the social stigmas still associated with it. That's ahead as well. Plus, a new study from Yale points to white leftist elitists do in fact talk down to minorities. Why do they do that? We'll discuss. Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilbert. Welcome to the program. This is America's radio town hall. I'm delighted every week to bring real Americans to the microphone to chew on thought-provoking conversation starters. I present to them, and where there is, thank goodness, no wrong answer. We cover so many different thought-provoking topics, and many that aren't even in the headlines. So welcome to the program. A big shout out to KCPS in Burlington, Iowa. Thank you for being one of our latest affiliates on Think America. First, I want to welcome Dick to the program. He's a former banker and a former pilot. I guess he still flies, my card says. Dick, you've moved all over the United States growing up, so you're kind of like a military brat, even though your father was a Chrysler exec. You're like me. I grew up on all kinds of bases. Welcome to the program, Dick.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good. And Matthew, nice to have you, Matthew. Matthew is originally from New Jersey. He's a marketing guy for a internet service provider. Matthew, nice to have you, and thanks for doing the program.
Thanks, Terry. Pleased to be here.
All right, let's get right to it, guys. Here is a topic you won't see in the headlines much. In fact, it's a very important topic, but it kind of came and went. Last year in 2017, two medical doctors and one doctor's wife were arrested at a medical clinic in Livonia, Michigan, Berhami Medical Clinic. They were arrested for practicing female genital mutilation, FGM. Sometimes in the press, you'll see it that way, because I think even to the eye in the morning newspaper, people don't like to read that. But it's important to talk about this. The three were members of the Farmington Hills Mosque, and they believe that this surgical procedure is necessary to ensure premarital virginity and fidelity once married for girls who have to undergo the procedure. So it's not only a kind of a cultural thing, though. They also promote that it's a religious practice. Now, there are times when a case involving female genital mutilation does go to court. And here's what we'll talk about on the program. Over the months, as a court looked at this, a federal judge got handed the case. He looked at it, and he recently dismissed charges against several Michigan doctors accused of mutilating the genitals of numerous underage girls. And it came down in his ruling that there is a federal prohibition against the practice, which he deemed is unconstitutional, he said, and constitutes, therefore, federal overreach. He was looking at the federal government itself in the federal statute, saying it does not have jurisdiction over this, and therefore he dismissed the charges. Let me start with you first, Matthew. Your reaction to this first, and then we'll get into why it got plopped on a federal judge's desk.
Well, my first reaction, Terry, is I'm surprised that they went with an Article 10 defense on this or ruling on this, with regards to states' rights and how incompatible the Commerce Clause is with this kind of a charge. I'm surprised they didn't go straight to the religious defense, because you read in Medium and a lot of the other literature that's out there that talks about FGM, you see about apologists for it, if you will, kind of giving that false comparison to male circumcision. And I'm surprised they didn't go that route. I think they probably went the Article 10 route to be less controversial and to kind of punt on this one.
I think that's probably part of it. And that's a complete answer if the judge ruled that way under that. And that was probably part of his thinking. But this Commerce Clause does not permit, he writes, Congress to regulate a crime of this nature, meaning it's a state crime. And when he got it, it had to do, not to undermine what you said, Matthew, but that's part of it. He had to look at the fact that some of these doctors were coming from outside Michigan across state lines to perform a good or goods or services under commerce, because commerce also includes goods and services. And this would be a service, and coming across state lines, then it becomes under federal jurisdiction. All right, Dick, you take a crack at it.
Well, I'm not surprised they didn't do the religious aspect of it, because if you said that all religious practices are private legal, you could also say, well, okay, I believe in human sacrifice as part of my religious deal. So I'm not surprising they didn't use that. To me, the Commerce Clause, to me, if they were crossing state lines to do this, that would make it illegal under the federal law to do it, just like interstate transporting of young children. That's a crime.
Confusing, isn't it? It is confusing. But if doctors are coming from across state lines, as some of them were, to join a doctor who owns the clinic in Berhami, and there was a woman doctor who did apparently come across state lines to help out with this procedure. And one would think at that point, Matthew, that all right, she is coming across state lines to conspire with someone in Michigan, a doctor in Michigan, to perform this atrocious act. And yet, if it is a cultural practice, and if it is a religious practice that is accepted and First Amendment and all of that, then it's not a crime, but it does fall under federal guidelines.
I would agree that it falls under federal guidelines in that case, but that opens us up to a couple of hypotheticals. For example, if this were a RICO case rather than a Commerce Clause case about female genital mutilation, for example, would the fact that people were commuting across state lines in order to make it happen, would that cause it to fall under the Commerce Clause? Because the Commerce Clause isn't intended to prevent people from commuting or to prosecute people who are commuting across state lines in order to perform a criminal act per se. My interpretation of it, and again, I'm no lawyer, has been when the crime itself involves crossing state lines. So traveling to a different state in order to commit a crime, as opposed to committing a crime while crossing state lines or fleeing the law over state lines, that has been, in my mind, what makes it a federal case and what invokes the Commerce Clause, rather than a doctor moving from Indiana to Michigan in order to perform a procedure which is illegal. Does that make it a Commerce Clause issue? I think that's a little thin.
I think you're on the right track, and it's not thin if they can slam the doctor who was coming across state lines with conspiracy charges, which is what she was up against back in April of 2017. The two medical doctors and one doctor's wife, they were all arrested. So there was this conspiracy adjective to the charges. Think of it that way, Matthew. And therefore, coming across state lines while prior conspiring to do this, then made it fall under a charge. So it is a little confusing when the judge dismissed all these charges. On the face of it, Dick, how do you look at this whole thing? By the way, just for our listening audience, 23 states don't have any laws about this.
It's crazy. It's child abuse. It's an insane thing to do. But I agree that if they conspired to cross the state lines, that should make it a federal crime. They did it. They conspired to do it. They crossed state lines. It's just as if you take a child and illegally cross state lines. That's a federal crime in itself.
That's exactly right. And it may be a state crime as well, depending upon what is done to that child in the state. The interesting thing about this in Michigan, Matthew, is that there weren't any state laws in Michigan back when this was being performed prior to April 2017, when these three doctors were arrested.
So those doctors could not be tried under that law because that would be an ex post facto law.
Correct. So now Governor Rick Snyder has signed laws. The minute they were arrested and this came to the forefront, the governor and the state legislature, Matthew, decided we better get our act together and get some laws on the books on this. And so they did. Do you think they will be a leader for other states to do the same so that other states can get ahead of this practice?
Absolutely. I mean, I think state law is the path for governing this kind of crime, for prosecuting this type of crime. The federal government, it is limited in the scope of the laws which it can create. I mean, you have the U.S. Code, which is the overall law of the land, but typically murder, for example, is tried under state law rather than federal law.
Correct. Now, prosecutors have said, Matthew, that they will need to appeal all of this because they, of course, want these doctors not just convicted, but heavy sentences. How do you think the appeal's going to go, given now that Rick Snyder, the governor of Michigan, has signed new laws? It can't be retroactive then with these new laws. How do you think the appeal's going to work?
I think the prospect for appeal in this case is rather dim, unfortunately, because a federal judge has ruled that the law is unconstitutional on the federal level. That's going to have to be fought all the way up to the Supreme Court now, really, in order to determine the constitutionality of this kind of a law in the face of Article 10 of the Constitution. And you can't try somebody ex post facto to a law being passed. So realistically, these doctors and the assistant, I believe, would have to be convicted under the federal law. They could not possibly be convicted under the state statute. That would be a serious breach of their rights.
Right. I agree. Dick, your thoughts on that?
I think if they had some good lawyers in the first place, this probably would not have been overturned or dismissed. But on appeal, if they get some good lawyers who can argue the whole thing, and on the appeals court, they may have a good shot at it. But as far as Michigan leading the way, I don't think this gets enough publicity for the other states to even care. Well,
this is one of the reasons why it's an important story to bring to Think America so that our listeners understand how complex it is. I mean, as disgusting as this practice is, I can't disagree with this judge. He had to go with the law and he dismissed it. I did dig deep, though, on one other element. And if it ever comes up with regard to the religious side of all of this, either in state or once again on appeal, then there was something in a manual about this ritual that I read that it would be deemed fine if the girl's genitalia was merely wiped with a cloth, so said the dictate, and then the cloth is burned. In other words, the ritual can happen without actual mutilation happening. And so her membrane would be wiped, and then that could signify premarital virginity and marital fidelity under a religious practice. But, and that probably, if that was ever challenged, that would probably hold up under the religious kind of element to this whole story. Fascinating conversation. Thank you to both of you. We'll be back on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. Welcome back to Think America. You can find us at thinkamericaradio.com. Click the red button at the top of the website to download our podcasts. I'm Terry Gilberg with Matthew and with Dick, my talkers, Terry's talkers. This week, it's the holiday season, guys, and that means more drinking and more hangovers. But according to a professor at Imperial College in London, hangovers can be avoided altogether by the year 2050. Why is that? This is Lean In Radio now, folks. He has patented a synthetic called Alcosynth. It is a synthetic beverage that can deliver the inebriated feeling of fun and that high that you feel when you've got a few in you without the downer effects of a boozer that you get with a hangover. His name is Professor David Nutt, and he says lives will definitely be saved. He's working on this. It's sort of like an electric cigarette, he says, but it is still a psychoactive drug that he's using. You just don't get the downer. Matthew, do you like this?
I'm gonna withhold judgment on this one because I need to see if they actually develop a whiskey that holds up to muster.
Okay. Are you a whiskey drinker?
When I must. But, taking a look at this, it's not the first time we've seen this. We've seen, alcohol without the deleterious effects in several forms of science fiction, and I'm a bit of a sci-fi buff. So not the first time I've seen this considered, but I'm interested that we're actually seeing a real world application coming. So it's really hard to say. The jury's out on this. Is society as a whole responsible enough to really deal with a version of alcohol or a synthetic for alcohol that lacks some of the nastier consequences? And what's the potential for overdose here? I don't know if you recall, a couple of years back, there was an energy drink alcohol combination. I forget the name of it, but there was a significant problem with people getting severe alcohol poisoning. A couple of people even died. They had to pull it off of the shelf as a result, because you would drink, but you would never pass out because the caffeine content was so high.
Mm. Well, he says you don't get at all the downer effects of a boozer. So you will never get a hangover. I don't know if there's a lot of caffeine in the Alcosynth. And by the way, it's spelled ALCOSYNTH, but nearly 3 billion people drink. And he wants to stop DUIs. He wants to stop all the vomiting on college campuses. He wants to stop all of the sidebar things that come with being terribly inebriated and or altogether drunk, including passing out. Alcohol is, of course, a sedative, and it suppresses the central nervous system. We know all that, so it impairs judgment. And I'm pretty for this. Nonetheless, it is a psychoactive drug itself, and so who knows until we know what's inside of it, what it will be doing, Dick.
Yeah, it's people who drink a lot or really enjoy drinking. They're creatures of habit. And it's just one of those things that it's too new to really make any kind of determination. You don't know what the negative effects could be somewhere else. There's always some negative effect to something, even water.
Well, that's true, I suppose. Sure. I mean, anything you're putting in your system, you can, I'm told, die by too much water too. There are people that just down water all the time, and it's overdosing on water. Do you think, though, Dick, it might become the Holy Grail or a life of emotional bankruptcy that Huxley wrote about in Brave New World, describing the synthetic drug Soma? I'm reminded of that.
Well, I think it could be useful. It may become the thing to do in the future, but it's so far off, and there's so many ifs and questions about it, and people like doing what they've been doing all their lives. And this is, drinking regular alcohol has been going on for more than just a few years. And I just don't think it's going to be a long time before that becomes the standard.
Mm. And Matthew, what do you think? Soma is that synthetic drug in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And it really is, the muscle relaxer. So you only get the high, it blocks the pain. And by the way, it's government issued in Brave New World. What do you think?
I think we're going a direction toward kind of the Soma state anyway. When we look at, the legalization of recreational marijuana, when we look at now the potential for synthetic alcohol, we're looking at a cultural issue where people want license to do things that make them feel good. And that could be a consequence of the last 20, 30 years of the cultural lean produced by, the 60s generation, where it's all about doing what feels good. And I think we're going to have to face that as a society. Are we going to overindulge, en masse and see the kind of societal decay that you see in Brave New World? Or are we going to enjoy all good things in moderation? Because right now I can have a cigar occasionally and not do too much damage to myself. I can have a glass of whiskey occasionally, not do too much damage to myself. With the promises of this Alcosynth, will people take that as carte blanche to abuse what they've always used occasionally?
A very good question, and a good question to leave the segment on. It's not on the market yet, folks. If you want to read more about him, he's Professor David Nutt, who is at the Imperial College in London, and he has patented this. He's been working on it for, I think I read 14 years, a very long time, and it will be out. He says we won't have the alcohol downer effects of booze by the year 2050. It will be a thing of the past. All right, straight ahead, we'll be talking with a 2-time Pulitzer Prize finalist and former investigative journalist at the New York Times on epilepsy. I'm Terry Gilbert. Think America, reason first, and then converse. Be right back. I'm delighted to bring to the microphone Kirk Eichenwald, the author of A Mind Unraveled, and he's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize finalist, former investigative journalist at the New York Times. He's here to talk about epilepsy. Epilepsy doesn't get a lot of talk in the news. A lot of people don't know much about this incurable disease, and they certainly don't know what to do to help a person who has an attack when you're witnessing attack right there in front of you. He's here to talk about some epilepsy's stigmas, the myths, the truths, and I would like to know, why is there no cure? How can we support loved ones with this disease? Kurt, hello, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get right into a little bit of your personal experience. It's my understanding that you were thrown out of college because of your epilepsy. You were fired on the first day at a new job because you had a seizure, or at least your employer learned of your seizure. Yeah. You've lost friends even as an adult. When they witnessed a convulsion, they didn't know what to do with you. And you were beaten in a subway station. You found yourself buried then in a snowdrift and unable to walk. And you were also sexually assaulted. That's quite a history. Let's springboard from there. How did you manage through all of that?
The end point has been that there really are two ways of dealing with trauma. One is to become a victim, and one is to become convicted in your own survival, meaning you make a decision. You decide, are you going to keep fighting? Are you going to keep pushing forward? And can you visualize the life you want to lead? I had very specific days, once in a hospital bed in Northwestern University Hospital, where I thought, why am I trying so hard? What am I fighting for? And at the age of 21, basically planned out my entire life, visualized what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be, who I wanted to marry, not by name, but by character, what kind of father I wanted to be. And every day of my life after that, as I was dealing with being very sick, rather than concentrating on defeating the sickness, I concentrated on taking another step toward that visualized life. And in truth, I do believe, I face severe trauma, but I do believe that this is a mechanism to deal with any challenge. It's not about just about epilepsy. It's about any health condition, any significant challenge. And hopefully people will get that message out of the book.
Why is there no cure?
One of my doctors put it, the day we understand epilepsy is the day we understand the human brain. What you have are, untold billions of neurons, and ultimately it can be a particular circumstance that's a cause. You have neurons that are firing, that are hypersensitive, that are firing from input or just arbitrarily. You can have, as the consequence of a malformation in the brain, you can have it as a consequence of a, scar that develops in the course of your brain forming. And there are many possible consequences, but ultimately, for many people, there is what is known as idiopathic epilepsy, which means no known cause. They don't know why particular neurons are firing. And other than finding the focus where is this seizure starting? They really can't identify what the problem is. And so when you have neurons firing throughout the brain, you can either surgically remove portions where you believe it is coming from, or where you can establish it's coming from, or you can, and that has some level of success, but again, you're making somewhat of a guess, or you can have medication, which is very, very brutal medication. The side effects are enormous, and you can try and control the firings of all the brain's neurons in hopes of getting that to impede the seizure. But ultimately, we are dealing with this. This is an organ beyond human comprehension at this point, and so being able to figure out how to make certain neurons fire, how to deal with electrical pathways, how to deal with stopping neurons from firing is an overwhelming demand.
Kurt, how do we get that message across to the public to help if they are witnessing somebody having an epileptic seizure? How do we start to destigmatize epilepsy?
I want to start off with what you do not do, because there are a lot of people who get injured during seizures by the activities of the well-intended. Number one, don't panic. If they have epilepsy, they've been through this many times before, and always recognize that panic causes injury. Second, this idea that people swallow their tongues, it never happens. It never will. You do not put something in someone's mouth, particularly, the common belief is you use a spoon. Never do that. What does happen is that people who have seizures, have convulsions, their jaw will lock down very tight, and they don't limit that on the basis of pain. Remember, their neurons are firing and telling their body to do these things. So if you put something in their mouths, if it's hard like a spoon, they will break their teeth. If it's soft like a pencil, they'll bite through it and possibly inhale the splinters. And so, do not put anything in anyone's mouth. We've got
limited time, so would it be important to look in the person's pockets for medication? Of course, call 911. Give us some quick guidelines.
I will say, don't hold somebody down. You don't need to worry about medication because you're not going to administer it. If you don't know if the person has epilepsy, call 911. If you do know, you don't need to call an ambulance. The ER is not going to do anything but have them sleep it off. And so ultimately, if the seizure goes for longer than 4 minutes, that's the only instance where you call an ambulance. Otherwise... So
you're saying to us to let that person ride it out and they will be better on the backside. But if it's more than 4 minutes, that's the time to alert 911. Is that accurate?
Right. And when someone wakes up, they will be very, very confused, very exhausted. But if this is a stranger, they might be able to tell you where, the information on who to call is. I would frequently, if I woke up, I would hold my wallet up in the air. And people can see my wallet ID, which tells people who to call. And so ultimately, you end up, it's very easy to deal with if you recognize you can't stop it. And all you can do is help the person by making sure nobody harms them.
Give us what we should do to help demystify this.
A lot of people think that we are possessed by demons. A lot of people think that we are mentally impaired. A lot of people think that we are contagious or dangerous. False. We are no different than someone who has asthma. We're not people to be scared of. We shouldn't be fired. We shouldn't be thrown out of schools. Treat us like normal human beings, because that's what we are.
Kirk Eichenwald, award-winning journalist, New York Times best-selling author. His new book, A Mind Unraveled, can be found at Amazon. Is that correct?
Any bookstore.
And good luck to you. I'm very impressed with your courage and how you are yourself an advocate for those who have epilepsy. We'll be right back. You're listening to Think America, Reason First, Then Converse. Very insightful information from Kirk Eichenwald. What'd you think, Matthew?
Very compelling. I mean, your heart just goes out to him.
And Dick, what were your thoughts?
Well, I was a teacher and I had a kid who had epilepsy, and they told me just what he said: leave him alone.
Leave them alone. And of course, they're exhausted and probably let them go home and rest after a seizure at school.
Yep.
I just wish there could be a cure, and I really wish some of the medication wasn't so harsh. My heart goes out to him as well. According to a study from Yale by Assistant Professor of Organizational Behavior, Sidney Dupree, white leftists apparently talk down and do dumb talk in their own speech. They use simpler words when they are talking to Black people. This came from YaleInsights.com, and it's somewhat ironic, Matthew, because you don't think that the very individuals who are self-appointed defenders of minorities then go ahead and treat them as a bit dumb. So why do you suppose white people, because the study was white with Black, and politically left-leaning white folks that are elitists or considered elitists, talk down to minorities?
It's not all that unusual. In fact, it's become a bit of a trope that, you have this this white liberal condescension toward African Americans. In fact, it was kind of subversively put into film recently. I don't recall the name of the movie. I apologize. But there was actually a film that was done about white suburbanites taking over an African American's body, for example. It was a bit of a horror movie. And it was addressed as a trope in that film, and it was very controversial at the time. And this is something that you see in the left-wing media and also in a lot of liberal talking points, especially when we look at Antifa and their enablers and the Black Lives Matter movement. There's this certain air of condescension.
Dick, what is your thoughts? In an effort to get along, white liberals, apparently, according to this study, use language that is simpler. And in fact, they use language that makes themselves appear less competent if the receiver of that is Black. And they do it, if the receiver is white, they don't do that, using language that makes themselves appear less competent. But with Black people, they do. So it's this subtle patronizing effect. What do you think about that?
Well, liberals, these elite liberals especially, tend to really have a superiority complex. And anybody who isn't just like them, they talk down to. I believe they actually talk down to pretty much anybody who isn't part of their social group, and especially these Ivy Leaguers who think they are just the top of the world and the best there are, and the rest of us are a bunch of dumb hicks.
But don't you think it's common, just natural human nature, Dick, for a person to play to his audience, his or her audience, if that person knows the audience? For example, if I am substitute teaching fourth graders, I'm going to play to that audience because they can't know what I know. So isn't it just naturally done by humans, just regardless of skin color?
Well, I don't know if it's because of skin color, and as a teacher, I would always go down to whatever level of the grade I was teaching.
Correct.
You have to. But when you're talking to people of individual races or people with just different political beliefs, that's just arrogance on their part. They really believe they are superior.
It's interesting you say political beliefs, Matthew, because this study, in fact, scanned almost 75 speeches by Republicans and Democrats that were given to minorities. And the candidates on both sides of the aisle were white candidates. And it was interesting how if a white candidate used warm words like, we are supportive, I'm supportive of you, very compassionate, and that might have been the Democrat there, I'm thinking, or if a Republican would say conservative but compassionate, then that would appeal to minorities. When Republicans used competent related words, that appealed less. So I guess the message behind all of this is if you want to be a politician and win over minorities, dumb it down and use folksy words, which should come as no surprise considering people go out and do barbecues and kiss babies and, roll up their sleeves and they're in jeans and cowboy boots and they go to parades and so forth. Matthew.
Oh, when you see, Barack Obama, when he was president, pulling an accent when he did Selma, Alabama, that film, by the way, that I mentioned was Jordan Peele's Get Out, which was a $30 million blockbuster. And a big undercurrent to that film was liberal white condescension to black people. And I think that's pretty indicative of how subversive it is in the society.
All right. We'll be back with Megan Porth. She will give us her input right after the break. I'm Terry Gilbert, ThinkAmericaRadio.com. We're back on Think America. Megan Porth joins us. As everybody knows Megan, she's a sponsor and contributor for Think America Radio. She's an attorney. She works in contract law and is the founder and owner of YourContractShop.com, a virtual law firm providing real results. Nice to have you, Megan. Welcome to the show. We have been talking about this Yale study that essentially, in an effort to get along with white liberals, they say in the study, the white liberals use language that is simpler and it makes them appear less competent because they're talking to a black person. That is patronizing. That is dumbing down their conversation. And it's bias, of course, but tell that to an elite liberal.
I'm not completely surprised by this, Terry. I'm sure you aren't either. This has kind of been an issue that I've had for quite some time when it comes to especially some of my ultra-educated elite liberal friends, is that there is a complete disconnect between the people that they are, quote, advocating for and what they actually understand the issues are. And this is something that I talk about all the time with my millennial friends. Everyone is up in arms with some of the things that are being said and done now. They're upset that Trump is saying certain things. They're upset that certain politicians are saying things. They're upset with the conservatives for not doing certain things. And it's almost like they've just woken up, Terry. And this is the issue that I've had because I've been involved in politics for so long. I feel like it's an easy way to pretend like you're involved and that you care without actually getting in the trenches with individuals. So for instance, if you really are working hard to assist the African American community, especially African American men, then your focus should be on not criminalizing nonviolent offenses, specifically drug offenses. I haven't seen as much outcry, Terry, for black men being incarcerated for things like marijuana as I had for white people using politically incorrect terms. And this focus on just the language and not on actual action, this is not surprising to me that this would be something that a white leftist would do, that they would say, because the entire premise behind the left liberal agenda is to actually become a patronizing and a patriarchal society, essentially, their status. So they're saying, we know better than you how to run your life. Don't worry, little boy. They're saying this to all of Americans, but especially minorities. We know what you actually need here. So this is not surprising to me because that's how they view everyone who is not white, not educated, not liberal.
I agree with that. But I think it's a little broader than just blacks, even though the study covered just blacks. The study wrapped it up in this way, Megan. They said it's a competence downshift. That was the words that was used. I agree with that. I'm not necessarily surprised at it. But the question I had for Terry's talkers that are online, which we had just moments ago, was, don't we all do that? Don't we all, when we know who the audience is, play to the audience? And I made reference to, if I'm walking in as a substitute teacher, for example, to a bunch of fourth graders, I'm going to talk down to their level so that I can actually teach them. Isn't that just a human nature thing?
Right. But it also highlights the maybe unrecognized biases that do exist even amongst white leftists, that the African American community or minorities in general need you to do that in order for them to understand what you're saying. So it's hard to say at one hand that everybody is equal and should be given the same opportunities. And then on the same hand, you're speaking down to certain people because of the color of their skin.
All right. You got 90 seconds now to wrap up the show and switch gears. What do you got for Change Your Life Technology? This is the segment to our new audience from Burlington, Iowa, our new affiliate, where Megan brings us in on life-changing technology to button up the show. Go.
There are about 4,000 patients waiting for a heart transplant right now, Terry, but unfortunately, only about 2,500 will actually receive the transplant they need. And then, as you know, there are issues with rejections. Well, of course, enter stem cells, and stem cell research has been able to propel these solutions forward by utilizing the recipient's actual stem cells to regenerate adult skin cells, to regenerate into a heart tissue. So they take the adult skin cells and they're able to regenerate it into heart tissue so that there will be less and less rejection on the behalf of the recipient, which is a huge issue amongst heart transplants. You have the issue of getting the organ and then, of course, of it being rejected. So we'll see this coming out of Massachusetts and Harvard Medical School.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you for that. We are Think America Radio. Subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the red button when you go to our website. Thank you, Megan, for being a contributor and sponsor of Think America Radio. You can find her at yourcontractshop.com, a virtual law firm providing real results. Thank you, Megan. Thank you to Matthew for being on the program. Loved having you and your input. And Dick, we loved having you as well. Think America, reason first, and then converse. Should robots be combat soldiers? Many say yes if they go by the rules of war. We'll talk about it on the program. The Epipen, the device used in emergencies to treat allergic reactions, is now a lot cheaper. And the Golden State, California, can it ever recover? Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. This is America's Radio Town Hall. Welcome to another edition of it. I invite two people to come on the program, real Americans from different walks of life. They come on with their unique reaction to thought-provoking conversation starters. Matthew is with us. Matthew is a marketing executive for an internet service provider, and he is originally from New Jersey. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Terry.
Nice to have you, and thank you ahead of time for coming on board. Dick is with us. Dick grew up all over the United States. His father was an executive who moved. He is a former banker and a former pilot. Hello, Dick. Nice to have you.
Good to be here, Terry.
All right, let's get started right away. Here's my lead story for this week. These days, Trump is threatening to produce the FISA documents. Now, most Americans now kind of are familiar with FISA. The FISA documents, especially the FISA application, and he wants to declassify other sensitive papers related to the FISA documents. The question is, what in the world is he waiting for? And I say to that, he sees the documents as, well, his trump card. Right? Highly explosive stuff to counterpunch back at the deep state and any and all never Trumpers. Now, I say he could have used this ace in the hole earlier during the Kavanaugh stuff, that back and forth. He had said he was going to declassify. There were pundits on television salivating for it. Other pundits say, oh my God, I hope he doesn't. I hope he doesn't, depending upon which political side of the fence you're on. And then he didn't. And now it appears as if he's holding out in case things go south with the Mueller investigation. And then he might have huge ammo to show Mueller and even the Clinton camp that it was Clinton and her cronies, and it was Obama and his Justice Department and Obama's FBI that colluded themselves to bring him down. Matthew, you first. What is your take on the timing of when the president should produce or will produce the FISA application documents so all of America can see, and other related documents, since he's been hinting at doing it?
I think what we're seeing here with the FISA documentation is mutually assured destruction on a political scale, Terry. This president knows that we're going into a new Congress, a new session where the House is now going to be under the control of the Democrats. And this is going to be so devastating a blow that it could threaten any action taken by Congress, any type of cooperation, any possible bipartisanship from taking place. And he doesn't want to be a lame duck president for the last 2 years of his term, or the last year or so of his term. So I think that's the reason why the president has been holding off on it, and why he's going to hold it until the last possible stroke, because he knows that it will be the end of any potential cooperation between him and the Democratic House.
If he gets through, though, Matthew, the Mueller probe, and Mueller doesn't have any there, and it's sort of a big nothing burger, will he ever produce it, Matthew?
It is so strategic a tool to have at his disposal. I think he's going to be loath to release it until the very end of his second term if he doesn't have to. But I do feel that from a perspective of strategy, from that contract negotiation mindset that President Trump has and has always had, you keep your ace in the hole until you have to take it out.
Dick, your thoughts on when the timing will be?
Well, I think it should be done like right now, because there's only 2 years left before the next election. If any of these clowns are going to get prosecuted, and we know how slow the federal government is to prosecute one of its own, he needs to do it now. But Trump's a pretty savvy fella. He knows what he's doing. He's fooled everybody so far. He's doing well, and I don't dare second guess him. Sometimes I think I should, but I don't. He knows what he's doing, and I got a hunch he knows why he's doing it this way.
Well, if he waits too long, then the statute of limitations will be over. He had Jeff Sessions in there that did nothing with the Clinton Foundation, nothing with the FISA documents. We learned about the FISA documents while Sessions was in session. But either they had something on Sessions, maybe financial, maybe related to race, and maybe related to his work as a senator. There was just something, and Sessions never touched it. I also think Jeff Sessions sort of thought the Mueller thing would be a nothing burger within 3 months, and thought, I'll jump back in and be attorney general. And because he's very loyal to Trump and so forth. And of course, it dragged out, and now Sessions is gone. So there may be timing elements that he has to look at with regard to the statute of limitations. Although, to your point, Matthew, and the new House of Representatives majority, it seems right now that House Republicans, until the end of the year, are scrambling to get as much as they can out of the Comey probe with regard to his subpoena, and Loretta Lynch, who also got a subpoena, by the way, and she hasn't even answered it yet, to squeeze what they can while they're still in power. So we have all of these threads coming together. Trump knows all of it. He's a target of Mueller's investigation. And if he wins on the Mueller thing and slides through, he may hold on to this, depending upon the timing with regard to the statute of limitations, to help him win a second term. Matthew.
I believe the timing here is going to be critical, as you said. And if he can hang in there, and if he can maintain control of the situation long enough, then he's going to be able to release it at the opportune time. Now, I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in the sanctity of the republic. I want it released immediately. I wanted it released months ago when we first started to get whiffs of the type of corruption that was taking place within the FBI, when we talk about Steele dossier, when we talk about all these questionable decisions that have led up to the investigation being where it is. But the president has to think about the long game. If he's going to have any opportunities to make any policy gains, he can't pursue scorched earth politics.
And yet he might have to in the next 2 years, to your point, Dick.
I think scorched earth in this case with the Democrats and the way they've been acting, and after 8 years of Obama and all the antics they pulled, scorched earth might be the only thing left to save the country. Got to get rid of these people. The whole government is just infested with basically crooks.
You know, the deeper I dig on the Christopher Steele connection with the dossier, which was fake, and of course the whole Julian Assange and the Podesta leaked emails and what Mueller's trying to do, there's so many different threads. You need a humongous chalkboard, guys, to sort of connect everything like police work. But nonetheless, the deeper I get, there are connections with Christopher Steele being a former MI6 spy from England, being the agent that was all connected with the Steele dossier, and of course Bruce and Nellie Orr and the Peter Strzok and the Lisa Page connections, our FBI and Andrew McCabe, and on it goes. Here's the next level that we may be getting to, and Trump may know it, that it wasn't just Christopher Steele. It was other MI6 agents helping, and maybe top brass in the British government that did not want Trump to be our next president, and colluding, bringing not just Russia in there, Russian hackers who hacked into the DNC, but Britain in there. Now, that may be a level that we will see unfold, and for various reasons, beyond my pay grade or any of our pay grade, because we don't have enough information, Trump may be holding back, Matthew.
That could be a situation where that's a negotiation tactic with regards to a post-Brexit trade deal. This is a president who doesn't let any piece of information, any strategic advantage go to waste. We've seen the brinksmanship of the China negotiations and the new Mexican-Canadian trade agreement negotiations, where seemingly unconnected pieces of policy will be leveraged to get the desire that the president wants. And I think that could be what we're seeing here with the British.
Maybe it's connected to Brexit as well. Maybe it's connected to Theresa May. What do I know? I don't know. But the idea that there's more than one MI6 involved or MI5, that more MI5 or 6 or 7 or 8 and more of these spies also helped Christopher Steele. In other words, he's not a just retired spy that put himself out there to be the agent to help the DNC and Hillary and pull off this dossier with the use of our DOJ and FBI. But there's even more. And whether or not that's connected to Brexit, Dick, I mean, how are we to know? But there are these other levels that make this holding on of Trump's holding on be ever more rich. And I can see now why he hasn't pulled that Trump card.
Yeah, it's we're probably never going to know how deep this thing actually went. But considering how radical left-wing England is, I mean, they make Bernie Sanders look like a right-winger. They did not want Trump being president. And it's entirely possible they were more involved over there.
I'm wondering if our FBI and our DOJ did a whole bunch of collusion ahead of time with MI5 and 6 and proffered through MI5 and 6, active MI5-6, proffered the name Christopher Steele. That I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here, but the more I dig, it is not just one former spy from Britain that was the tool. It was more that knew about it and that were behind the scenes, Matthew.
I don't think we can really take good stock of how far down the rabbit hole this is going to go. And I think right now the political environment in the UK is so unstable under Theresa May's government that there could be elements within the government itself, within Parliament right now, and potentially within the British intelligence community acting against the goals of the conservative government that's there. You know, I say conservative, they're surely not conservative by our standards. Mm-hmm. But right now, Theresa May is in the battle of her life. She has the 1922 Commission of Backbenchers in Parliament and Jacob Rees-Mogg seeking a vote of no confidence in her. So we could be seeing a deep state scenario unfolding in the UK going back 2 years, where the current conservative government may have been unaware or may have been powerless to do anything about it.
And that's the connection then going back 2 years with the buildup to Brexit and the vote as well. Good discussion all. I was just kind of thinking that he would release these FISA documents to the public and stall the Supreme Court nominee confirmation. He could have easily done that, and then we wouldn't most likely see a Democrat-controlled House of Representatives. But he didn't. We went through the battle with Kavanaugh, and the conservative side, Republican side, lost the House. But maybe that's because he has to hold on for a bigger counterpunch down the road. I'm Terry Gilberg. Good discussion. When we move on the program, robots becoming combat soldiers. Good discussion ahead. Be right back. Welcome back to Think America. I'm Terry Gilberg on Facebook. Find me at Terry Talk Radio. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or anywhere where you subscribe. You can easily click the red button at thinkamericaradio.com. It's in the upper right-hand corner of our website, and download the podcast and all of our archive shows. Should robots become combat soldiers, Terry Stalkers? Many say yes, as long as a robotic military has a code of conduct, or what's typically known as rules of war. Now, the Ukraine military likes combat soldiers as robots. They pushed for this against the Russian-backed troops, for example. Unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones as we know them, are already considered weapons and are used in combat, but the unmanned ground vehicles have not exactly taken off and become really popular yet. And yet last year, in October of 2017, an operator-controlled ground robot was dubbed the Phantom, and it was highlighted in Washington, D.C. at a convention of a military audience, and it became quite popular. So, Dick, you first on this one. Are robots in general, would you say, better trained than human combat soldiers because they're smarter, they've got more weaponry, they're more effective at warfare, or not?
They're not. Like anything in the military, they get all fired up about the newest whiz-bang technology they can come up with. But the fact is, these things have to be proven that they're reliable. A battlefield is a miserable, dusty, dirty place, and electronics don't do well in that area. Robots themselves don't do well in that area. You get them dirty, and half the time they stop working. They tried, even way back in the Vietnam War, they went from the M14 to the M16 because it was new and fancy, and a lot of people got killed when they stopped working. So unless they are going to make sure these things are absolutely reliable, you can't rely on them. You're going to have people babysitting them instead of being protected by them.
That's what on balance, that's what I think in general. But I would imagine, Matthew, that it depends on the drill. Do we like aerial robots as soldiers more than ground robot soldiers? My answer would be, what drill are we talking about? Now, if it's in the dusty Middle East, I think not. I agree with Dick. What say you?
Well, I think an important distinction that we need to draw a little bit of nuance to this conversation is what level of autonomy we're talking about with these drones, these ground drones, if you will. Because with current aerial drones, there are really two varieties. There are, three. There's autonomous, semi-autonomous, and remote-driven. Up in Nevada, they actually have an Air Force base that's almost completely devoted to real-life blood and bone pilots flying drones halfway across the world. And these are simply remotely controlled by a human who makes the decision whether to pull the trigger.
Correct.
And that really is where the moral and ethical consideration comes into play is there a human pulling the trigger, or is there an artificial intelligence or an algorithm that's pulling the trigger?
That is a really astute point, and I'm glad that you made it. I'm reminded of a movie that came out on Amazon or Netflix or one of them called Jack Ryan, and he plays this CIA and soldier with a Middle East conflict, and yet out of Nevada are some subordinates that are manning drones. And at one point, they've got a village in the target, and boom, everybody is blown up. And so there are ethical considerations. And at one point in the movie, the young man that was a subordinate goes over to the Middle East. I believe, if memory serves, it was in Syria, and apologizes to the family. And that creates a whole bunch of other problems with the drama and as the scenario unfolds. But nonetheless, you make a great point about the ethics of it, because is it just an algorithm, or is it a person purposely from distances way far away attacking something over there, and therefore doesn't have the forethought, and it's not immediate because it's too easy to just click send that message, Dick.
Yep. There's so much, you have to have somebody in charge of it. I don't think you can possibly really just turn one of these things loose and let them start blowing things up. They could easily get confused and turn on you. You don't want that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also think it just reminds me of the whole driverless car discussion too. Are robot cars really better than real drivers? Depends on where you're going. Depends on the terrain. It depends. It just depends. And yet robot cars are here to stay. And they're making them so that they're kind of mini homes anymore. There's little kitchens in them now, and there's bedrooms, and anything you can do in your home, you can now do in a driverless car. It's just pretty fascinating to look at all this. I keep coming back to it depends on the drill. It depends on, but to rely on it wholeheartedly is not smart, even though they now have this ground controlled robot dubbed the Phantom. And like you said, Dick, military people look at this and go, oh my God. It's like, look at that shiny thing over there. It is just the latest and the greatest. But I don't know if it's the greatest. We should remember always that it's programmed from the human mind, and the human mind has the creativity. A robot doesn't. We'll wrap it up there and be back here on Think America. I want to give a shout out to KCPS, our latest affiliate in Burlington, Iowa. Welcome aboard. Nice to have you on the program. Straight ahead, can California ever recover the Golden State to become what it was in the past? I say the bloom is off the rose. We'll have a discussion straight ahead. Welcome back to Think America, where we reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilbert. Switching gears now, I want to interview Rick Oltman. You probably know him. He's done major media over the years, particularly on immigration, and he is a law enforcement advocate as well. He's a columnist, a media pundit, contributor to many news organizations, a Vietnam vet, and a member of FAIR. He specializes on immigration, and for today's interview, the decline of the Golden State, California. People don't want to go there anymore. Rick, welcome to the program. Why don't they want to go there?
Well, living in California today, Terry, must be like living in South Carolina in the early 1861. California doesn't want to follow federal law. It wants to go its own way. It's a one-party state now. It's controlled only by the Democrat Party. So we don't have any really competitive elections or competitive ideas in the media. And so it's not surprising. We have some of the highest taxes in the country, the highest fuel taxes in the country. So it's not surprising, that people want to escape, and that, the once great Golden State of California is now seriously in decline.
It sure is. I think the bloom is off the rose. You wrote an article for Social Contract magazine called Sanctuary, California in Decline. And what caught my eye was the adjective word sanctuary. It's because it's not just a sanctuary city in San Francisco, for example, or in Los Angeles, but the whole state is a sanctuary. Is this the kernel? Is this the takeaway our listeners should have about California, that because of sanctuary policies, that's why it's in decline and the bloom's off the rose?
That's certainly one of the reasons. And look, it's not a coincidence that what we're seeing down at the border now with this so-called caravan of migrants coming up, that they're not at the Texas border, they're not at the Arizona border, they're at the California border, which extended the trip a little bit. But of course, they're at the California border because they know, they've been told about the sanctuary policies. They're expecting that they're going to be able to get in. The incoming governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has now announced that he's going to withdraw the National Guard from the border, which wasn't there to do any enforcement to begin with. And so, it's not just, the people in America know that California is a sanctuary state. Everybody in the world knows it's a sanctuary state, and we're going to have this problem solved or not at the California border. But I'm hopeful that it's going to be solved, and that the so-called asylum seekers, none of which are asylum seekers, are going to be turned away with the help of the Mexican government and pushed south, and we won't have to deal with them. Thank goodness, because California will welcome them with open arms.
They will. Now, you mentioned Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom, from what I read about him, always uses the terms, and it's true on the website as well, California values. Rather than say we're a sanctuary state, we want sanctuary campuses, we love the DREAM Act, we're not going to alert anybody that's here illegally to ICE, or ICE to them, rather. We want legal defense for illegals. We want everything for illegals, blah, blah, blah. He talks in terms of California values. And that all sounds so noble, doesn't it?
That was the name of the bill that was signed by Governor Moonbeam, Jerry Brown, and it's perfect Orwellian newspeak. Let's not tell the truth about it. Let's make it up and make it sound like something. Well, yes, I'm for values. Of course I am. It's a perfect real life example of what was written about in 1984 and all the propaganda that you can think of in order to get people to just either agree or just nod and say, okay, that sounds good, and then get on with their lives and forget about it.
Yeah, well, it plays, that's for sure. Tell us a little bit, because this national audience might not realize that California is a single party state. In other words, every person in state government is a Democrat.
In 2010, there was a ballot measure to eliminate the divided primaries in California and just put everybody on the same ballot. And it was passed. And so starting in the next election cycle, it's only the two top vote getters are on the ballot. And it's not necessarily a Democrat and a Republican. It could be two Democrats, which it most likely is. Now, this year, John Cox, the Republican candidate for governor, happened to get more than the other Democrat that was in the race. So we actually had a Democrat and a Republican run against each other. But that's not the way the system is designed. The two top vote getters, if they're both Democrats, are on the ballot, which, okay, it eliminates any possibility for a Republican running. But more importantly, it eliminates a public debate about issues. Because two people from the same party are not going to debate an issue, the pros and cons of this solution or that solution. It eliminates all debate, which is what it's designed to do. And so California is now, it's all run by the Democrats in Sacramento, and we're going to see the decline begin to accelerate, I believe, under Gavin Newsom. And people are leaving left and right. I'm talking to people in other states, in Idaho and Arizona, I'm hearing it all the time that we're getting more and more people from California. I say, well, I just hope they're not bringing, their California values, the kind of things that led to California's decline with them. And what I'm being told is, yeah, some of them are.
Well, I hope not. That remains to be seen. If they love all these values, why don't they just stay there in spite of the fact that there's more crime? The schools are terrible, bad at best. There's lower test scores. Hospitals are overrun by non-payers. Many people go so far, writers, maybe you're one of them, that say it's a hideout for terrorists. Driver's licenses to illegals. That's, of course, always a hot button, controversial issue and they bring that to Arizona or Nevada or Texas or New Mexico, that will be highly debated. What else? Illegal students get financial aid for school. It just goes on and on and on. And now I would add to that,
from the environmental point of view,
how is Gavin Newsom going to be handling all of this, including the highly controversial issue about wildfires in both Northern and Southern California, that all of the tree huggers say, love and adore every single tree and just wait for rain to put out the wildfires.
And President Trump did talk about some of the environmental policies that led to it. Anybody who drives through any area of forests in California can see dead trees, fuel laying on the floor of the forest for years, piling up. And then I was doing some research. I mean, our air quality here in Northern California, 120 miles from the town of Paradise, which was wiped out by the fire, our air quality was worse here than it was in Peking. Okay, that's how bad it was. But so I started to do some research because everybody knows about all the fuel that's laying on the forest floor, which the tree huggers won't let anybody in to clean up. But I also found there's lots of dead trees still standing that were killed by disease. And then I'm thinking, what the heck are these environmentalists thinking? What about cutting down the dead trees to move them out so that they don't infect the live, healthy trees? So there is that. I don't know if Gavin Newsom's going to get involved in that, but obviously that's something that needs to be taken care of. But and I will say this, I always like to include this, it's not like every city in California is failing. The city of San Francisco, which can't seem to clean up its streets for the piles of feces that are also just loaded with hypodermic syringes for the drug addicts, the city of San Francisco is taking action. They're going to ban plastic straws, Terry.
We're down to a minute. I don't want to cut you short, but I'll give you the last word and then invite you back down the road when we talk more about California. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, history doesn't tell us what didn't happen. History doesn't give us many examples of people acting proactively to stop stuff, the bad things. Apparently, you have to hit bottom, or enough people have to be hurt or made uncomfortable enough to act, and that may be where we're going in California. I don't know where the bottom is. I don't know what it's going to take for the people to rise up and to get the people in Sacramento to come to their senses. But I don't think it's going to happen in a normal, civilized manner that we would hope. I think something terrible is going to happen before we see the people come to their senses and demand that government do its job.
Do you think that the wildfires were obvious enough of something terrible happening? Rick Oltman, thank you so much. You can find Sanctuary California in Decline at socialcontractmagazine.com. Thank you very much for being on the program. Good insights. We appreciate you. Straight ahead, let's talk about the Epipen. There has been some new news on it, but we'll give you the backstory first here on Think America. Reason first and then converse. Welcome back to Think America. I'm Terry Gilberg with Matthew and with Dick. What did you think of California trying to recover, but probably won't for a while?
Well, we go there all the time, or we used to go there all the time. Now our California trips have been cut to very minimal numbers. The place is a loony bin. I mean, you got people walking around the street naked. You got people pooping on the middle of the sidewalks and sleeping in the gutters, and everybody says that's just fine. I don't think it is.
Rick Oltman talked about San Francisco, but L.A. is running a close second to that. 60,000 homeless, Matthew, in Los Angeles. I mean, that's an astonishing number.
Absolutely, it is. I mean, we've got the sanctuary state issue, sure. We've got the homelessness in Los Angeles, but when is Sacramento going to do something about the rising epidemic of assault straws being used in restaurants?
Case in point made. The Epipen, let's move on. It's a device used in emergencies to treat severe allergic reactions that can make people have a very tough time breathing. They can get a skin rash. Some even go into shock. There was an over-the-top public outrage a few years back, and that continued up until about to the early part of this summer this year. The drugs manufacturer raised the price 500% for a 2-pack. And that was in dollars, real dollars, for many real Americans, $600. Then it was lowered to $300, but now they're producing a Food and Drug Administration approval generic version. And yes, that has finally been approved. Finally. And that was the beginning of this summer. But before I get into that new news, $300 for a 2-pack. Yes, that's better. But let's go back to last year, guys, with the outrage. Why did it take, why do you think they raised the price 500% just because the free market allowed them, Matthew?
Well, just because the free market allows something doesn't mean that it's ethical or that it makes good business sense. When you hold a de facto monopoly on a product, you hold control over the pricing, but there's also the public relations consideration. If we're talking about purely a business-centric view on here, this was a terrible move. This alienated the buying public, this alienated the entire nation, and really damaged the overall brand. I mean, I'm in marketing, that's my job, brand management, and this was just a terrible maneuver. So there's no good business case to be made for the 500% increase in price.
Don't you remember, though, when they were making the business case? Don't you remember that? I do.
Yeah, and I remember rolling my eyes the entire time because from a marketing perspective, it was poison.
Absolutely. Price gouging all over the place. Dick, your reaction to that?
I agree. I used to teach marketing, unfortunately, and it was insane. It was just pure, unadulterated greed, and they thought they could get away with it. They got away with it for a while until they brought it down to 300. And then, of course, there was outrage as to whether or not there would be a generic. And then the FDA stalled. It's finally been approved, but it still is very expensive, Dick. Well, there's only three people making it, as I understand it right now. And you don't get competition with 3 companies. These guys play golf together. They have dinner together. They know exactly what they're doing. There's no coincidence. It's the same price. For all of them.
One of the things, Dick, that I thought was kind of a faux pas is when the public says, we'll just cut it in half. And they were screaming that last year. Well, cutting it in half is $300 now for a 2-pack. A lot of Americans can't afford that as well, Dick.
You got that right. Cutting it in half from an inflated price in the first place, that's a joke. They think we're really stupid, or they just don't care one way or another.
Well, at least the public got involved, Matthew. But it took the FDA a long time to just approve a generic version and then kind of put it out there. And now it's half price. So it was kind of a twofold effort. But still, now we got a generic that is still pricey, Matthew.
Well, I think I would counsel patience in this type of situation, and I realize that's an easy thing to say when I'm not paying $300 a month for 2 EpiPens. Right. But when we're looking at this, we can't look at it as why didn't decreasing regulation and allowing more generics instantly solve the problem? It doesn't work that way. There's research and development timeframes. There's still testing that has to take place before even under lax and lenient restrictions against generics that something can come to market. So when we look at it and toss up our hands and say, well, the government has to get involved now, that's not the case. The invisible hand of the market moved in this situation, and the people called out for the government to lessen the restrictions. That is the right path. We need to let the market play out here. You
talk about the invisible hand. They had started at $100 in 2007 for a 2-pack, and within time it went up to $608, and it took that ceiling before the outrage. And yes, you're right. Then the invisible hand of the government got in, but still it is at $300 for this 2-pack. Let's hear what Megan Porth has to say. She'll be with us next. Of course, she's libertarian. She's up next. Stick around. I'm Terry. Be right back. Welcome back to Think America. Megan Porth joins us. She is a contributor to Think America Radio and sponsor of this segment. As you know, she works in contract law as an attorney and is the founder and owner of yourcontractshop.com. Your take on this Epipen situation, it's the device, of course, for allergic reaction that makes people sometimes even go into shock. The drugs manufacturer had raised it 500% last year, and then there was public outrage. Megan.
I remember this. There was, in fact, I think one of the CEOs ended up going to prison eventually, which I wasn't surprised by. But I think this is just supply and demand, Terry. I mean, if you read into some of the different ways that they are affecting, as far as specifically pharmaceuticals are concerned, you need to see at least 3, if not more, competitors that are available that are actually offering things on the market. So basically, what's happening here is we have 2 competitors, and it's not probably an antitrust issue, but they're demanding as much as the market will bear right now. And because that $300 on the Mylan generic version seems to be, people aren't as outraged by it. People are purchasing the pen still. Then supply and demand has come in, and people are saying, okay, well, we'll pay $300 for those 2 EpiPens. Hopefully what will end up happening eventually, Terry, and we talk about this all the time as far as the FDA is concerned, is the FDA, now that we have a generic version approved, will be able to move forward with more approvals for more companies. We won't just have Mylan and Teva. We'll have more companies who are providing more generic versions of the EpiPen, and that's when we'll really see the price plummeting. So for all the people who are out there listening, not that we have a lot of pharmaceutical CEOs out there, I welcome them to join in on this game, because you really can drop the price here. Now, the big financial barrier for a lot of these companies is, of course, getting FDA approval. And since that's already happened, I think we will see more companies jumping into the market, especially because of the demand for the EpiPen. You might not have seen this with other pharmaceuticals, but because there's such a demand, especially amongst young children, I think we are going to actually see more drug companies enter the market. And then, of course, Mylan and Teva will respond to that. And then we'll see each of these companies lowering their price further and further and further.
And because now there is a generic that has been approved, the FDA was onto this last year when there was such outrage, and the manufacturer raised it 500% for a 2-pack, which came in at $608. But Megan, still a 2-pack is now roughly around $300 still. I'm with you. The more competition, that will drop and drop. But in the meantime, it still is pretty pricey for a lot of Americans for a 2-pack.
Especially for something that's life-saving and used in an emergency situation. So probably what we see, and I've never done a study on this, but it would be interesting to see how many people end up trying to, how many emergency visits are increased because of the lack of access to the EpiPen. And that's where we see this kind of cyclical cost that we're seeing in the environment here, where people say, oh, well, the FDA has to be in place to make sure that all of these drugs and all of this food that comes that is in our homes is safe. But what they don't realize is the high cost to barrier means that only these large companies can enter, and they have a lot of shareholders, and then therefore we pay for it in the end somewhere, Terry.
No wrath like a woman scorned. There were many mothers that were scorned on this, and they raised holy hell. So good for them. What have you got in Change Your Life Technology? You sponsor this segment of the program. Go, Megan.
Believe it or not, Terry, in different developing countries, especially in Nigeria, there's an issue with expired and fake drugs being sold to individuals. And we know that there's a lot of issues with corruption in Nigeria, and the citizens are being terrorized by different groups. And unfortunately, this is one of a major issue for Nigerians. Now, of course, young people, because I love them, Terry, have recently won a first place prize in the junior division of the Technovation World Pitch Summit because they've developed an app that can actually determine whether a drug is fake or real. And they specifically did this for their Nigerian peers. Yeah, it's awesome that they've done this.
Wonderful. How did they do that? And who are these children? Do you know?
This is held in San Jose, California, but they're Nigerian teenagers. And the app actually, it categorizes all of these different drugs that are out there, and then they scan a barcode. It's very simple, but it revolutionizes the fake drug issue.
Gotta love technology. Gotta love young people who love technology. All right, that's terrific. You can find Megan Porth at yourcontractshop.com. She is the sponsor of this segment. It is hercontractshop.com, a virtual law firm providing real results. Megan, thank you so much for that input. And we want to say thank you to Matthew. Nice having you on the program with all of your thought-provoking responses to our thought-provoking conversation starters. Dick, the same to you. And again, KCPS, welcome to Think America, and we hope you welcome us into your home. They are our latest affiliate. You can find me, Terry Talk Radio, on Facebook. Subscribe to our podcast. And until next time, reason first and then converse.